coming to the St. Genevieve Museum Learning Center's speaker series. We're glad to have you come out tonight. And you know, I usually start out by thanking a certain person for letting us use this facility, but he said, really, Steph, you don't have to do that. But we're going to anyway. Thank you, Big Preminger. I told you I was going to do it. He deserves it. So raise your hand if you're a member. Just about everybody. Great. We'd love to see that. The museum is supported solely by admissions, memberships, gift shop sales, grants, and sponsorships. And we are fortunate enough tonight that our speaker presentation is sponsored by the Missouri Humanities Council and locally by High Tech Fire Protection. Anyone from High Tech here? They didn't make it here. Well, maybe they'll still be coming in, so we thank them so much. Before we get into our program, we'd like to tell you about a few coming events. On February 16th, join us as we mark the 105th anniversary of the passing of Moses Riney. Now, Moses Riney, of course, was born a slave, and he had fought in the Union Army to help abolish slavery. Then had owned his own home in St. Mary, became quite a personality down there. We have an exhibit about his life at the museum, and a limited quantity of the second printing of the book on his remarkable life is available at our gift shop. So check that out if you like. And let's not forget, on April 25th, we will bring back the mouse races right here at the Orris, and that's always a fun time. So if you haven't been to it, how has been to a mouse race before? It's fun, isn't it? Yeah, it is a blast. It is. It's fun. Now, for tonight's presentation, you're in for quite a treat, I think. Elizabeth Eikman, she is an expert in St. Louis history, women's history, and the history of photography. She is a teacher, scholar, and public historian with experience working with museums, public libraries, universities, and the local tourism industry. She works as the Assistant Director of Curricula Innovation in the College of Arts and Sciences and as a lecturer in American Culture Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. She's also a member of the Missouri Speakers Bureau, which is where we found her. Dr. Eikman has extensive experience as a local tour guide, university instructor, and public educational speaker. So she's got quite a lot to say, and her topic tonight, of course, is Unseen St. Louis. So please welcome Elizabeth Eikman.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the warm welcome, and I'm really looking forward to our talk this evening. Like Steph mentioned, I'm here as a member of the Missouri Speakers Bureau, which is a speakers bureau that is sponsored by the Missouri Humanities Council and also supported by the State Historical Society of Missouri. So we thank them for underwriting tonight's program. So what I have for all of you tonight was a program that was sort of inspired by the work I had been doing in local archives, researching and finding cool things, and then being like, this has nothing to do with what I'm here to look or talk about, but this is cool and I need to stop looking at this because I'm getting distracted, so I'm going to set it aside. And I kind of built up this collection of those cool things that I really couldn't do anything with at the time, but wouldn't have otherwise really known about or been able to see if I didn't go to the archive myself. So I collected some of those things and put them all together in a presentation to share with all of you tonight. So you can advance the next slide. Tonight I have to share with all of you a newspaper column, a photograph, which I will admit is related to my research, but I just love talking about it, so I'm sticking it in. A magazine, and then I have a short sound clip to share with all of you at the end, an audio. So the first object that I'll share with all of you is our newspaper clip. I thought, like, what better way to start a talk about Unseen St. Louis than talking about a time when St. Louisans were looking for something. And in this regard, it is a short, funny article about a time that St. Louisans were possibly looking for love. So this article was published in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, March 5, 1881, and the column was called Catches, and here was the headline. Wealth opens wide the door to wedlock, the richest bachelors of St. Louis cataloged, and the ladies of great expectations enumerated. Yes, you can laugh because it's funny and weird. And when they say, that it's a catalog, they weren't kidding. On the next slide is a picture of the entire spread. Everything in red is part of this Catches article, and it is just a big long list of eligible bachelors and bachelorettes in St. Louis with like a little note about who they were and their story. So I have a few people that were featured on this list to share with you, one of which I'll kind of tell you a longer story about. The article opens with a short excerpt explaining how this column even came about. So on the next slide, I'll read an excerpt from that for you. So, a Post-Dispatch reporter in search of a subject for a special article, so it was a slow news day, okay, chanced upon a well-known young member of society in the rotunda of the Lindell Hotel. Pictured there on the left is the Lindell Hotel in 1865, so about 15 years before this article ran, that was located actually on Washington Avenue in downtown St. Louis. The building no longer stands. Lindell Hotel, it was a fancy little hotel. The young society devotee was in a grumbling mood and straightaway fell to complaining. Okay, right, so picture this, probably a guy sitting at the hotel bar in a bad mood. The editor, comes and meets this young society devotee, and he says this, "Indeed, no. It is not true that the rich fellows and the stupid fellows are the popular ones in society, nor yet the rich girls. We poor and clever fellows have nothing but our cleverness to rely upon, and we have to exert ourselves to be entertaining. We are the good dancers and the ones who throw animation into society, and we are really the popular members. But good heavens, when it comes to talking matrimony, we are snubbed." The conversation thus begun led to a consideration of whom the wealthy bachelors of St. Louis are and who the corresponding ladies of great expectations. So, all that being said, we should take this article with a grain of salt, right? The editor found a guy at the hotel bar, or I'm imagining, it was the rotunda of the Lindell Hotel. I'm gonna imagine there was also a bar there. In a bad mood, can't find a date. So instead, he sort of goes on this long rant listing all of these wealthy bachelors and bachelorettes in St. Louis who are single, and they all get recorded in this column. And as such, everything written about them isn't exactly favorable, as we will see. So, one of the men that was talked about was a man named Charles Pierce. And that's on the next slide. This was the excerpt that was written about Charles Pierce. Charles E. Pierce is a bachelor of about 40. He is a striking-looking brunette with black side whiskers and mustache. He is the owner of Cracker Castle on Choteau and St. Anne Avenues, where he lives in bachelor solitude. He has a fair legal business and must be worth nearly $100,000. 1881, $100,000, ton of money, okay? He is fond of society, and the very youngest set at that. A number of ladies have their eyes on him and always smile when he smiles. It's not a totally offensive column, but this was Charles Pierce. So, has anyone ever heard of Charles Pierce before? Has anyone ever heard of Cracker Castle before? All right, I'm going to tell you about both. So on the next slide, we'll see a picture of Charles Pierce. There he is on the left. He lived in Cracker Castle at the time of the article, 1881, which is pictured twice here. Images both from 1863, so a few years before he actually would move in and take ownership over the castle. Pierce was born in 1842 in New York. He served in the Civil War and then commanded both the St. Louis as well as the Missouri National Guard. He was an attorney and served one term in Congress from 1897 until 1901. He was the final owner in a long string of owners of the Cracker Castle, not the original owner. The original owner who built the house was a man named James Pierce. It is just coincidence that they have a similar sounding last name. James Pierce's last name was spelled with an I. But James Pierce was co-owner of Kendall and Pierce Company, which was a hardtack cracker company. Hardtack crackers were basically like saltines. And they were very, very popular during the Civil War, sent to the battlefield as food for soldiers, because as we all know, we've had a saltine that kind of like sticks to your insides, right? It makes you feel full. So Kendall and Pierce made a ton of money in the mid part of the 19th century, and James Pierce needed a place to put it. So he decided to build this monstrosity that became known as Cracker Castle because of his business. Cracker Castle had 14 rooms. It was 5 stories tall, so it was by far the tallest residential property in this area. It cost $115,000 to build, which would be more like $3 million or more today. So, not an insignificant amount of money. The mahogany doors, which were like these huge, tall, hand-carved mahogany doors, cost $2,000 alone. And you can see all these different like ornate architectural features. So sort of no expense or attention to detail was spared in the building of Cracker Castle. Well, the Civil War ends. The hardtack cracker business just isn't what it used to be. Oh yeah. Oh, good question. Corner of St. Ange and Choteau Avenues, which is the Lafayette Square neighborhood. Yes, so this is just immediately south of downtown St. Louis. Like south and then slightly west from like the Soulard neighborhood, if that is familiar to you. Good question. So 19th century, Kendall and Pierce Cracker Company, they're, kind of hard up for money. So James Pierce decides to sell Cracker Castle. He sells it over the next 10 years or so. It actually passes through a number of different owners. Then in the late 1870s, it goes up for auction. James Pierce goes to the auction along with another bidder. They sort of get into a bidding war. Charles Pierce wins that bidding war, and he pays a whopping $13,950 for this $115,000 home that cost to build. So kind of a good investment on his part at the time. So he lives there. He is a known bachelor, and it kind of becomes like a little party bachelor pad. So he has tons of parties. At one point, he turns some of the upper floors and some of the rooms on the other side of the home into like private apartments and rents them out. Then in 1896, a cyclone rips through, coming from Illinois, across the Eads Bridge, rips through just the southern portion of downtown St. Louis, right through the Lafayette Square neighborhood, and devastates a lot of the residential property there, including Cracker Castle. It's deemed unsafe for Charles to live in Cracker Castle, so he moves out and actually moves into a small apartment above a grocery store right across the street, which I think just sounds terrible, having to look out your window and stare at your party mansion that was ruined by a tornado. But that's what he had to do. It was never able to be repaired. He never moves back into the Cracker Castle. And actually, in 1901, he passes away. So after that time, hands change, some repairs are made. It never becomes the big mansion and home that it once was. And by 1941, the land is sold, actually, to the city. What is left of Cracker Castle is demolished, and the Clinton Peabody housing project is built a little bit later on that land. So nothing remains of Cracker Castle except for these few photographs that we do have it, and the memory of Charles Pierce, who, as far as I know, maintained his bachelor solitude, as our young devotee wrote in the article, through his death. What questions does anyone have about Charles Pierce or the Cracker Castle? Okay, cool. I have some columns of a few other men that I just think are funny that I'll read to you on the next slide. So 3 other guys that are mentioned. David Rankin. You might recognize some of these businesses and names too. Brookmeyer and Rankin is a widower and worth a pile of money. Widows take note that he's an amiable man of the blonde type. Frank Day is about 32 years of age and considered one of the handsomest brunettes in the city. Although he is the surety of inheriting something toward 100,000, no lady has yet been able to charm him out of bachelorhood. He is growing feebler every year. He's 32. It's really sad. Poor Frank. I hope he was okay. Sylvester Chouteau is of the firm of Chouteau and Edwards and might be put down at over $200,000. He looks like a married man, for he has a bald head. It's so sad. So you see, they're not exactly the nicest profiles of these guys, but still kind of funny, nevertheless, I think. And then the next thing I'll share with you about this column are some of the ladies. So they introduce the ladies of the column on the next slide. And here's what they say. There are comparatively few ladies in St. Louis or anywhere else who have sufficient property in their own right to enable them to be independent. The lady catches must of necessity, be chiefly those who have wealthy parents or whose expectations are great and tolerably certain. Happy is the maiden life of the young lady whose father is reputed very wealthy. I agree. That is not my situation, but wouldn't that be nice? Though she be ever so plain, she will not want for attention. So they're not very nice to the women in the list, but here they are. So a lot of the women that are included are actually like groups of women from families. Like, hey, all the sisters in this family's rich, they're all available. Or this woman, like her dad was rich and he just passed away, so things are looking good for that. So I'll share with you a few of the women on the next slide who were talked about. So the first is Miss Ellen McKee, is the only daughter of the late William McKee. He owned 2/3 of the Globe Democrat newspaper. Yeah, there you go. Besides other property. Nearly all of this will go to her, so that she is one of the wealthiest single ladies in the state. Her mother's income is about $80,000 a year. She is said to be about 40 years old and is, therefore, a decided catch for some lucky man. Miss Daisy Lackland is the daughter of Rufus J. Lackland, the very wealthy president of Boatman's Savings Bank. Miss Mamie is another daughter of a more petite size. I think that's a little rude. Both young ladies have literary and musical tastes, and Daisy Lackland has a decided dramatic ability. Miss Bernice Morrison of 1638 Lucas Place is probably the richest single lady in the city. She has no parents, I guess that was a plus, is of a literary turn, quite accomplished, and shuns the sham of general society. So, those were the ladies, a few of the ladies that were mentioned. As far as I've been able to tell, this column ran one time and one time only. I don't know if it's because the people that were mentioned weren't too happy about their names, being mentioned, or maybe they read it and just laughed, or maybe the news picked up the next week and we sort of moved on. It caught some attention outside of St. Louis, though. On the next slide, we'll see that Cairo, Illinois, wrote to the editors of the Post-Dispatch. Here's what they said. To the editor of the Post-Dispatch, being a subscriber of your paper and noticing a list of notable catches in Saturday's issue, would like to furnish you a list of the Cairo mail catches, if you would be kind enough to publish them. An early answer through your paper will oblige. And here's what the editor wrote back. We will have to decline this generous proposition. Cairo is a good town, but it is too far out of our range. We have all we can do to keep society in good trim at home. They were like, did you hear how rich these people were? We're not letting them leave our city. Start your own list. So I thought that was kind of funny. Other cities kind of wanted in on the action of this silly little profile. So that was, yeah, go ahead.
I've been watching Pride and Prejudice, and to me this is this
Totally.
American version of Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, totally. Yes. The American version of Pride and Prejudice. Yes. It seems like, just like high society. Yeah, like, I love it. A little dramatic, a little backstabbing, maybe. Yeah. Any other questions or comments about this column?
Did you ever
say anything about what Mr. Pierce did for a living?
Oh, yes, he served in the Army, and for most of his career, he was an attorney. He went to law school. Yep. All right, the next thing, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you know, is Pierce Boulevard in Woodsville named after?
Ooh, that's a good question. Is it spelled the same way? Do you know? Pearce? I don't know. Honestly, the chances are probably pretty high. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else I know. I mean, Wentzville was would have been built up a little bit after him. Yeah, and kind of far away. I'm gonna look that up. That's our homework, is to all go find out if the Pierce Boulevard in Wentzville is named after Charles Pierce. Thank you. There will be no grades or follow-ups on the homework, just FYI. All right, on the next slide, what I have to share with all of you is this, which is a stereo card. Has anyone seen a stereo card before? Okay, good. Awesome. So this stereo card was from about 1870. This method of photography was super, super popular in the late 19th and really into the early part of the 20th century. It was kind of like their version of like the 90s viewfinder, like maybe your kids had those, because it created, or you had those. Viewmaster. Oh, thank you. Viewmaster. Because it kind of creates a 3D image. So on the next slide, this is how they were used. So this was a cardboard, basically like a cardboard with a printed image, and then you would use a stereoscope, like how the woman is holding it there. You'd hold on the bottom. They look like little binoculars. You'd set the card kind of on the tray in front. You could adjust the perspective, moving it closer to you or further away, and the two images overlapped would kind of create a bit of a 3D effect. Special cameras were used to create these, and they were actually two separate images that were just ever so slightly different, which allowed for that very subtle 3D look. But they were super popular way for Americans to kind of visit places that they wouldn't otherwise be able to go to and kind of see it in a little bit more of an interactive way. On this stereo card, actually, if you go back to the last slide, then we can zoom in. That would be perfect. If it works. The left arrow. Perfect, thank you. So this scene is of downtown St. Louis. The street that we're looking at right in the front here is 4th Street. The building with the columns, that's the old courthouse. And then if we were standing here, so we're looking at the old courthouse this way, if we were to turn like this, today we would be looking at the arch. So this is in what is today a park that's in between the old courthouse and the arch. So we're looking north down 4th Street, and on the left side of the old courthouse is Market Street. In the lower right-hand corner of the image, what you are seeing is the wraparound graphic of the last part of the word photograph and the first part of the word gallery. And then, so this was picturing a man named John Fitzgibbon's photography gallery. And then if you advance 2 slides, we'll be back on track. Perfect. So this is John Fitzgibbon. This is a portrait of him that was published in a local journal in 1877. This is another view of that same building, just from a different earlier period of time. But this was his photograph gallery. John Fitzgibbon came to St. Louis in the 1840s, and he was the first to establish a daguerrean studio, a studio where they made daguerreotypes, which is the earliest form of image making, and then he would later become and identify as a photographer. But he is known for the man that brought photography to St. Louis. And he opened his daguerrean gallery in St. Louis in 1841. The idea of creating an image, the camera obscura, was invented in 1839. So it came to the middle of the United States very quickly. And John Fitzgibbon was the man that brought it. He opened a studio. He really established himself as an innovator, as one of the top premier producers of this particular kind of image making. He was an entrepreneur and a business owner, and he was like very loud and proud about that. So on the next slide, we can kind of see all these images coming together. We're viewing the top piece of the wraparound. You can see the words are different just because they're from different periods of time. But that was his studio where he practiced downtown. So on the next slide, I have to show you, well, two different slides, some advertisements of his from city directories. So just to kind of give you a taste of how he presented himself publicly. So this is from the city directory from 1848. J.H. Fitzgibbon, daguerreotype miniature rooms, northeast corner of 4th and Market Street. And here's what he says. Pictures taken in the latest and most improved style from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in rainy, cloudy, or fair weather. Invalids waited on at their residence. Also, likenesses of deceased persons taken. So let me tell you about what's going on in those few sentences. So first, he says, pictures taken in the latest and most improved style, right? All right, he's just talking to himself. Oh, he's a good photographer. From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in all of these different weather conditions, right? So at this period of time, flash photography is not a thing, right? We need to rely on natural light to create a good image. So ideally, it's sunny, it's bright, and we're doing this inside of a studio environment with big windows, right? Which is why he was in such a tall building, so he could have his studio up as high as he could without being blocked by any surrounding buildings. And he is claiming that he is so good that he can take a clear, crisp image in the latest and most improved style at any time of day, regardless of the weather. He also says invalids waited on at their residence. At this time, like portable darkroom technology, making images on film and sending it away to be developed, those are decades away from being developed. So at this time, images have to be developed the moment that they're taken, and the materials needed are very involved. There's lots of them, they're heavy, cameras are heavy, tons of equipment that you really need to be photographing and developing all in one space and doing it quickly. So mobile photographers weren't really a popular thing. And if they were, they would have been very expensive to the people getting their image taken. So he's like, I'm good enough at my job, I can do this. And then he also advertises that he takes the likenesses of deceased persons. Post-mortem photography becomes a very popular practice almost immediately after the photograph is invented, right? If families have a limited amount of funds that they could spend taking a photo of a family member, they spent it on taking a photo of family members whom they could never get the chance to take a photograph of again. So in the mid part of the 19th century, for a lot of people, the first time and the only time they had their photograph taken was at their death. So you'll see a lot of elder folks getting photos taken that are deceased in the mid-19th century, and a lot of infants and young children who died in childbirth or at a very young age.
Was it cheaper? Why didn't they just do it when they were alive?
Oh, the question was it cheaper? Why didn't they just do it when they were alive? Photography was very expensive. So, you weren't just gonna walk into a studio at this time and be like, we're doing family portraits and we're gonna go do it every single year. So there might be enough funds to pay for one person in a family to get a photograph taken that year. And so they were gonna save it to get a photograph of someone that they couldn't get another photograph again. Yeah. This practice, maintains but becomes less popular once photography becomes more accessible and people could get photographs taken of themselves. Also, a lot of these people at this time would have lived the majority of their lives before the camera was invented, right? So, you know, for those reasons as well. But cost was a major, major factor. And, right, it was also a way to preserve family legacy and history, right? So these photographs would be something that could be tucked into or complement these similar practices like that were happening in family Bibles. Like the family Bible being passed down, now we can tuck photographs of ancestors in there along with like saving locks of their hair. All of those kind of like practices were in play at this time, and photography was just another way to do it. So this was a popular request, a popular practice, and it was also something that had to be done quickly. So when a person died, if you wanted a photograph of them, you were calling like a clergy member and your photographer to come to the house quickly and get that image captured. And John Fitzgibbon was the guy that did that. And on the next slide, so this is a city directory ad from 1852. It's a little bit later in time. I will not read you this big long ad, but with the exception of the last point. So you see two little like fingers like calling out. The last message says, "I wish it distinctly understood that I take no pictures less than $3 or higher than 40. 1852, most photographs at this time ranged between like 70 cents on the lower end, maybe 50 depending on, up to like $3 maximum. So he's here saying his minimum price is like the highest that anybody else would pay, all the way up to $40. Now, did anybody ever pay him $40 to get an image? I don't know, right? Who knows? But he was expensive. And his whole thing was basically like, you know, good photographs aren't cheap, and I only produce good photographs. And just was kind of like proud of that, right? Now, did he give people breaks or ever charge that? Yes, probably. But this was how he advertised himself in the city directory. The vast majority of the images that he took are either lost or tucked away like in family archives, right? He did a lot of portraits, and so I am convinced that they survived, but they're just in a box in somebody's attic, or they're like a precious thing that has been passed down through families, right? They're not like collected in one place for us to see. However, there's one photograph that he did take that I'm gonna bet that almost everybody in this room has seen. And that is the portrait of Dred Scott, which is on the next slide. You've all probably seen this, right? Or at least heard of Dred Scott. So Dred Scott was an enslaved man that lived in St. Louis that sued for his freedom, and his case went all the way up to the US Supreme Court. The decision was made the very same year that this portrait was taken, so 1857. And I think it's kind of, I don't know if it's interesting or poetic, or this is me just wanting to make something out of this, but right, like he initiated his court case at the old courthouse in St. Louis. It was heard in both the lower circuit court as well as the Missouri Supreme Court in that building. And this portrait was taken in a studio directly across the street. So all of these things kind of happening in that area, I think are kind of cool. So this original survives. It's in the Missouri Historical Society archives. But I know that John Fitzgibbon also took other portraits of the Scott family, even though those don't survive. On the next slide, we will see, this is from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper talking about the Scotts. Up at the top in the middle are the Scott's daughters, Eliza and Lizzie. And then there on the bottom, we have Dred Scott and his wife, Harriet Scott. And I know this because we'll see in the captions, which I've kind of like excerpt for you on the side, Dred Scott, photographed by Fitzgibbon of St. Louis. His wife, Harriet, photographed by Fitzgibbon of St. Louis. There's no such caption under the illustrations of the daughters. Maybe we can assume he also did those, or maybe not. Maybe they were just illustrations that were prepared by whoever illustrated all of the other images. So you might think like, well, you know, this doesn't look exactly like the image we saw on the slide before. And that's because at this time, of course, we can't reprint photographs in newspapers quite yet. So what they would do is they would take a photograph, and an artist would illustrate a rendering of that image, carve it into a wooden block, an engraver would carve it into a wooden block, and then it would be placed in the type tray along with the type and rolled out to be printed. So these are illustrations based off of photographs that the illustrator would have been looking at, taken by Fitzgibbon to create these images. And the other thing that John Fitzgibbon did on the next slide was he operated a very successful photography journal in partnership with his wife, Louisa. So Louisa is pictured in the image on the left there. They started the St. Louis Practical Photographer in 1877, and they operated it together until John Fitzgibbon's death in 1881. And after which time, Louisa was not able to inherit the magazine as part of his estate. There was an issue with that. So she had to go to court. She lost the bid to buy the magazine, and so she lost control of the St. Louis Practical Photographer. The very first issue that they ran together there is there on the left. But what she did next, which I think is pretty cool, she makes a statement that she's basically like, dear readers, don't worry, the people that bought the Practical don't know anything about photography, and they don't know anything about running a business. They're gonna fail, and it's not gonna go anywhere. And so I don't know if she just like cursed them or jinxed them or what, but she was totally right. Nothing happens with the Practical Photographer. And so what she decides to do is she turns around, she reboots the magazine under a new name, the St. Louis Photographer, which the first issue of which is pictured there in the center. And you can see toward the bottom, it says Mrs. J.H. Fitzgibbon, publisher and proprietor. She would run the St. Louis Photographer, changing its name again one more time to the St. Louis and Canadian Photographer to pull in a weird but significant Canadian audience that she had cultivated, all the way up until 1906, at which time she announced her retirement and sold the magazine to the Bulletin of Photography, which was operating in Pennsylvania. So it moves from St. Louis there. She ran this through offices. They moved around a little bit, but they were pretty much always somewhere on Olive Street in downtown St. Louis, maintained the publisher and proprietor title throughout the entire run, which makes her the only woman to even come close to doing anything like this in the 19th century photography community. So there were about 4 or 5, depending on how we want to define it, competing major photography journals in the US in the 19th and early 20th century. The Practical Photographer was one of them. She was the only woman to be in charge of the magazines for even just a day, right? But she did so for 27 years. And she did it all from St. Louis. And I think a lot of that was in part, and actually they talk about this in the journal, because of her husband's reputation. So there's this really cool moment in the 1890s, so this is like 10 years after John Fitzgibbon has passed away, of a person coming up to her at a photography convention and being like, oh, I feel John Fitzgibbon, he's here, like through you, you're carrying on his legacy. I think that readers and others in the photography industry felt very connected to him and his influence through her. And it continued to be an authority on the subject of photographic technology, best practices. They would publish each other's work. They would talk about experimenting and what went bad and what didn't go bad. And you can see the chemical compositions, and early on them all containing mercury, and being like, oh, this is really scary to see, but this is what they were doing. So thinking, oh, this was dangerous. But really just trying to contribute to the betterment of the photographic industry as a whole. And while John Fitzgibbon was alive, there was also a little section of jokes about photography that he wrote himself. None of them we would find funny today because they would take way too long to explain because the technology is irrelevant, but they were there nevertheless. So those are the Fitzgibbons. photography in 19th century and early 20th century St. Louis. The next thing I want to share with all of you is staying on the print magazine trend is about Prom Magazine. Has anyone?
Oh God, yes.
Yes, okay. Were you a reporter? I love talking about Prom Magazine because sometimes I'll get people who are reporters. Did you read it?
Every month.
Subscriber? Yes, but not a reporter.
No.
Who else? I saw some more hands. Readers? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, cool. Prom Magazine, I think, is one of the coolest things about St. Louis history because it's so unique. There's nothing, at least that I know of, quite like it. This was an independent publication that was by and for like local high school students that ran from 1947 to 1973. It was published by, a man that was like an editor and a publisher. His name was Julian H. Miller. And he sort of brought together area high schools to be part of and contribute to Prom Magazine. And so the deal was that any school could be part of it, regardless of whether they were public, private, religious, or secular. Any high school could choose to be part of it. Some chose not to, but a lot of local high schools chose to be part of it. They would have kind of a cohort of Prom Magazine reporters at the school. They would report on events in the school or in their local community, take photographs, write up editorials, opinion pieces, put them all together and publish this monthly for sale for 10 cents a copy, or you could become a subscriber so you never miss an issue. And one of the amazing things that I don't know how they ever got anything published was any school that was actively running content in that issue had to get approval by all the principals at each of the schools in order for the issue to run. So all of these principals had to come together. I hear some laughing. Do we have teachers in the back over there laughing about that? They had to come together and all agree and approve on the content so that it could run to print and be published. So I don't even know if anything like that could ever happen today, but it did for every single issue. So the magazine, of course, reported on prom. So on the next slide, I have an example from a July 1965 issue. This was about the prom queen at Normandy High School. I liked it because I thought the headline was kind of cute. It just says, "A queen cries, then smiles at Normandy." And there she is, like, overwhelmed and crying, and then super happy. And there they are, dancing together. But they also covered, other kinds of events at the school. The next slide is of the Mary Institute's May Day Queen. This was from June of 1961. This particular issue drew my eye to it because I love the panorama photographs. I thought those were so cool, capturing everyone that was involved in this event. But they didn't just report on things happening at their schools, they also reported on things going on in the community and around them. So the next slide is from the same issue where Prom Magazine reporters visited the Cardinals dugout. So they got pictures with them, with the players, they interviewed them. You can see they published the Cardinals schedule for that season in 1961. And then when you flip the page, they also got autographs of all of the players at that time. And I always joke, like, whoever has the original copy of that, I hope they're holding on to that, like, with white knuckles. Because you'll recognize a bunch of the names up there. Kind of cool. Then on the next slide, we have another cool event that they hosted. This was from February of 1965, where Prom Magazine hosted the foreign correspondents from NBC News Network. So you can see on the left, this is the cover of this issue, and you can kind of like see the white tablecloth behind it. All the correspondents are sitting, and then the image at the center, you can see the white, just to draw your eye to it, the white tablecloth again. There they are sitting with this huge room of students with all these really great photographs of students from a number of different high schools. So Prom Magazine itself would host organizations that reporters from all the various schools could come to. They could take photographs, they could ask questions, and these like future journalists or budding journalists could talk to current journalists working in the field, which I think is kind of cool. On the next slide, in December 1965, they hosted Sammy Davis Jr., so there was another event that they had. And if you see the third photograph in the column there, that is Johnny Rabbit. So yes, maybe you all remember listening to him on the radio. So they would also get support from like local community figureheads, right, to come be part of their events. Like this was a big deal. One of the fun things that they did that I love is they also ran like a little advice column. They were very innovative because what started running years before Dear Abby became a thing. It's not exactly like Dear Abby, but it's Dear Abby for high schoolers. So on the next slide, this was Dear Aunt Polly, and you can see like the little corn because it's corny. Students would write in, and then Aunt Polly would write with a response. So I have a couple to share with you. They were like concerned about cars in this issue for some reason. So two of them were about cars. July 1965 is when this is from. Dear Aunt Polly, my boyfriend says he gets car sick on the same day every month. What could be the matter with him? The payment comes due. Like, yeah, that happens to me too. Dear Aunt Polly, my boyfriend Napoleon said he was named after a famous French emperor. My name is Hazel. Who was I named after? And she says, a nut. Poor Hazel. Dear Aunt Polly, I have to take a driving test tomorrow. What is the worst thing about trying to park between two cars? She says, the noise of the crash. That is a terrible sound. So that was Dear Aunt Polly, like giving good, corny advice. And I just think that's fun. So there was like some serious reporting, events, communities, and then just like some sound advice or responses to the questions plaguing you. On the next slide, we will see that December 16, 1965, so this was from that same issue, was the Mayor Cervantes, issued a mayoral declaration proclaiming December 16 Prom Magazine Day. So it's in recognition of its anniversary and just sort of reiterating and declaring the importance of the publication to the city and its history. And as you will see in this very same issue, there was an ad that was provided by Frank Sinatra. So he writes, on 20 of your years from September of my years, that album came out that very same year, best wishes to Prom Magazine from Frank Sinatra. He had come to St. Louis a couple years prior and met with Prom Magazine correspondents, so they maintained a relationship with him, and he sent his well wishes in 1965. What questions, comments, or stories about Prom Magazine do you have to share? If you are interested in reading Prom Magazine, the St. Louis City Library has nearly a full run of the issues that have very recently all been digitized. So you can go on their website and look at them. You could also visit the library and see them in person if you wanted to. And they also have this super, super cool collection of Prom Magazine photographs that contain a bunch of photographs that were unpublished, but still produced by Prom Magazine reporters, if you would want to go look through and maybe see photographs taken at your high school or something like that. So you can relive your Prom Magazine subscriber days from your computer if you want. All right, the last story that I have to share with all of you, and this is perfect timing, is a story about a woman named Edna Fishel Gellhorn. Edna Gellhorn was very involved in early 20th century suffrage movement in St. Louis and would go on to be involved in a number of different social movements throughout her life in St. Louis. She was born in 1878. She died in 1970. And here she is pictured here at a member of the Equal Suffrage League Board meeting in 1912. I circled her head there in the back. And this was the Equal Suffrage League headquarters in 1912. And one of the cool things about this image is if you look up like suffrage in St. Louis, this is an image that like is published and kind of comes up a lot. But it wasn't until I was doing some research on microfilm that I actually found the original publication of this in a newspaper that identified all the women in the photograph. So that's how I know for sure that this was her in the back, and you might, recognize some other names, last names of women up there. Edna Gellhorn was a member of the Equal Suffrage League Board. She was a founding member of the National League of Women Voters, which is still active organization today. She served as president of the local chapter of the League of Women Voters for 3 different terms. And maybe you recognize her last name a little bit because her daughter, Martha Gellhorn, would go on to be a very prominent and successful war correspondent. And she also married Ernest Hemingway for just 5 years. So she was Ernest Hemingway's mother-in-law for 5 years in the 1940s. So this is Edna Gellhorn. One of the other things that she did in this time with her suffrage work was she helped to organize in 1916 the Walkless Talkless Parade, as she called it. So we can see that on the next slide. It's also become known as the Golden Lane Parade, and this took place in June of 1916, which was on the 14th, the first day of the Democratic National Convention that was being held in St. Louis that year. And they decided to put together a demonstration that brought together suffrage organizations across the state. There were actually tons of different suffrage organizations across the state of Missouri, as well as like small local groups that were like hyper focused on their individual counties. Brought everyone together with the idea that they would host a walkless, talkless parade, which I thought a parade like had to have walking, but not in 1916 because there was no walking. All they did was line up, so the bottom photograph that you see here, they lined up along the streets where the DNC delegates would be walking from their hotels on the way to where the convention was being held in a straight line. They're like toes lined up. They have their parasols and their sashes and their yellow suits, and they were just silent. And the point was to demonstrate the enormity of the silence by not allowing women to participate in the process of voting. So they held this demonstration. On that day, the delegates walked by, and then they also had what they call the tableau. These like public performances were really popular, and it was also another like static demonstration, but we can see this happening in the top image and then the image in the newspaper there. And this was, they had one woman represent each state in the Union, and then they would be dressed up or holding a shield to represent places where states where women had full suffrage rights, partial suffrage rights, or no suffrage rights. And they just sort of all stood together. And at the very tip top, you can see her the best in the newspaper clipping. You can see one woman standing, the background is dark, by herself with like something on her head. That was Lady Liberty. That was played by a woman named Barbara Blackman O'Neill, who, if you could go back a slide, left arrow for me, is seated actually directly in front of Edna Gellhorn here. She was also very, very involved. Her mother, by the way, was an actress that appeared in Gone with the Wind. So just kind of a random fact there. But Barbara Blackman O'Neill played Lady Liberty on the next slide in the tableau. So there she is there. Martha Gellhorn, Edna Gellhorn's daughter, was also part of the tableau. She's one of the little girls down in the front of the image there. So on the next image, we'll see that when Missouri ratified the 19th Amendment on July 3rd, 1919, Edna Gellhorn was right in the room, right above the shoulder of the governor as he was signing. And then, of course, the 19th Amendment would be ratified to the Constitution the next year in August of 1920. So when Edna Gellhorn was celebrating her 75th birthday, her friends hosted a party for her, and at that party, they had all kinds of activities planned to sort of celebrate her life and her legacy. They conducted oral history interviews. They, of course, had reception and food and merriment, and then they also had some performances. And someone there also had the foresight to record these events. So there are these really cool oral histories of her talking about the Walkless Talkless Parade, of her talking about the time that she met Susan B. Anthony, and which is kind of crazy. And then there are also recordings of her friends singing original songs that they wrote about her and her life. So if we go to the next slide, I excerpt a song from you. It's just called Edna. These are the lyrics that you'll see. This is about like a minute long. The entire song is about 5 minutes and goes through her whole life. I excerpt here for you the piece where they're talking about her suffrage activism in St. Louis. Okay, so we can play it and you can listen to the song. Your friend when they rhyme your name with Hedna. They made up a new word. So that's Edna Gellhorn. That's all I have to share with all of you tonight. What other questions do you have? Comments? Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time. Maybe learned a little something. Thanks again to the Missouri Humanities Council, for our hosts. I appreciate you all so much.
Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. We thank the Missouri Humanities Council. And of course, our local sponsor, High Tech Fire Protection, has been our sponsor for tonight. So we certainly appreciate that. I think I forgot to mention our next speaker series on the 25th will be Clem and Joanne Donzig from St. Mary. And they're going to talk about the 93 flood from the perspective of St. Mary's and Kaskaskia. So we had one, 5 months or so ago on specifically St. Genevieve. Well, we're going to find out more about St. Mary and Kaskaskia on the 25th. So we certainly hope you join us for that. So safe travels, everyone, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.